This talk, it's born out of the chapter in my book, 1001 Reasons Why It's Great to Be Catholic. In that chapter, 169 reasons are 169 different miracles that we have established. And there's plenty more than that. And in those 169 miracles, they're categorized. And I'm going to be following that categorization in the presentation tonight. Now, when it comes to miracles, normally from my experience, Maronites or Catholics in general get very excited about miracles. They're not so excited tonight by the look of it, but that's all right, okay? Now, for most of us, instinctively, miracles tell us something about our faith. They're meant to give us confidence about our faith or credibility to our faith. We want to hear about miracles because they prove something true about our faith. Divine miracles, they give proof to the fact that God exists, for example. And we give an example of that if we go back to the Old Testament and the Exodus event and all those miracles. The 10 plagues, in a sense, were miraculous interventions by God in the world, and they were meant to prove to Pharaoh and the Egyptians that the God of Israel was the one true God. Okay? And we might then have Christian miracles that would prove the claims of Jesus of Nazareth to be the Messiah, to be the Son of God and the Messiah. That's why he did miracles. That's why he displayed power, which amazed people, which were meant to be signs that to be read by the ordinary people as well as the intellectuals, the scribes and the Pharisees, giving testimony to his claims that he was the Son of God, the expected Messiah. Then we've got specific Catholic miracles, miracles that would vindicate specific Catholic beliefs. And this is primarily the purpose of tonight's talk. Miracles that go to show the truth of the Catholic belief in the real presence in the Eucharist, apparitions of Our Lady and hence therefore Marian dogmas, the intercession of saints, etc., etc. Now, this talk tonight is more emphatically a talk to just put it out there and to show, we've got about 20 odd miracles to show tonight, that miracles do happen. I'm not going to give a philosophical defense of miracles. I'm not going to give a reasoned explanation against the attacks of modern day atheists or agnostics who tell us that miracles can't really be happening for two reasons. They say, well, we don't see miracles today, therefore that's proof that the claims of miracles that we read about in the Bible didn't really happen. Those claims are really more in the realm of myth, make-believe, exaggeration. That's point one. Point two, atheists in a more deeper philosophical sense say that miracles can't happen because if God was really the God Christians claimed him to be, almighty and all-loving, then this almighty and all-loving God would be intervening every day, regularly, for everybody. Not once in a little while here or there, playing hide and seek, peekaboo, a miracle once in a while to one certain person once in a while. But if God was really all-loving and all-powerful, you'll be seeing him actively doing the miraculous every day. Since we don't see that happening, then the God of the Christians either isn't all-powerful, or if he is, isn't all-loving. And if he's not one or the other, or if he's not both at the same time, then this Christian God doesn't exist. I'm not going to go down that realm and rebut that philosophical argument or arguments with our own philosophical arguments. This is more a in-your-face, look, we've got miracles, they've been proven, they've been tested by academics, by doctors, by scientists, and there's no other explanation for it. So that's what we're dealing with tonight. Now, we just want to have a look at the next slide. We've got some quotes from church councils, and primarily here what we've got is quotes from the First Vatican Council. Because by the second half of the 19th century, rationalism was really gaining its grip on the intellectual classes. The vast majority of ordinary people were still practicing their faith and doing it quite well. But in the realm of the intellectual, there was a great denial of the miraculous becoming established. So the First Vatican Council said the following: however, in order that the obedience of our faith should be consonant with reason, God has willed that to the internal aids of the Holy Spirit there should be joined external proofs of his revelation, namely divine facts, especially miracles and prophecies, which, because they clearly show forth the omnipotence and infinite knowledge of God, are most certain signs of a divine revelation and are suited to the intelligence of all. So there the First Vatican Council is saying that, God has revealed himself, but to back up that revelation for our own sakes, because of our own doubts. And this is how Jesus operated. We see when a number of Jesus' miracles, he makes it clear, I did this in order that you may believe. And he was doing miracles on a regular basis. But for example, right near the end of his public ministry, he raises Lazarus from the dead, again, for the purpose of reinforcing their faith. Then the First Vatican Council also said the following, condemned the following proposition, quote, that divine revelation cannot be made credible by external signs, and that miracles are not possible, and hence all accounts of them are to be banished among the fables and myths. And that's what I mentioned earlier. So that's a proposition that's been rebutted. Now, we've got some other definitions of miracles, or a number of definitions. I guess you can't turn to better saints than St. Augustine or St. Thomas Aquinas. St. Augustine simply said that miracles are, quote, divine interventions in the visible world. Anything which appears arduous or unusual beyond the expectation or ability of the one who marvels at it. St. Thomas Aquinas says, every effect is reckoned to be miraculous if it surpasses the powers of nature. Okay. To put it simply, they basically put these two quotes together. The miraculous is an intervention of God in the world that overrides nature, that brings about an effect that is not natural, but above nature, that could not normally be produced by nature. Okay. Now, what we're going to do now, let's have a look at the different categories. Now, some of these miracles, I guarantee you've heard of before. A number of them, though, quite surprising. There are hundreds and hundreds of beautiful miracles out there that we know very little about because they've happened in parts of the world we don't normally focus on. For us here in Australia, we've dominated, our mindset's dominated Anglo-American mindset, Western European mindset. There's some good in that and there's some not so good in that. But there are a lot of miracles that have happened in the Middle East, in Asia, in South America that we know little about. So I'm going to give you miracles you're aware of and some you would not know at all so far about. Some of you would have heard of this first miracle, the miracle of Lanciano, Eucharistic miracle. Let's go back to the year 800. And there's this monk celebrating Mass. And this monk has real doubts about the church's teaching regarding the real presence. It was a monk from the order of St. Basil, a Basilian monk. I presume that it had its origins in the East. The Easterners already had a very defined term to explain what happens in the Mass. They call it metaousios. Now, our term, the Latin Western Church describes it and uses the term transubstantiation, a change of substance, while the accidents, and if that is the appearances and etc., remain as they are. Metaousios is just the Greek equivalent, change of substance beyond the original substance. So by the year 800, I mean, it's a more than a well-established belief in the East and the West that something miraculous happens at Mass, and the bread and wine, because of the words of institution given to us by Christ and pronounced by the priest or the bishop, the bread and the wine changed substantially to be the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. Well, this priest had doubts, but during the course of the Mass, what happened is that the host, the edges, the circular edge of the host, changed into visible flesh, while the wine changed visibly into blood. Now, we still have, more than 12 centuries later, we still have the relics of this great Eucharistic miracle. And okay, some people looking at it would think, oh, okay, that's interesting, but what is it really? You can see there in the second picture, the edge of the host. What didn't change, the central part of the host remained visibly as bread, but that has decayed and disappeared over time. The blood hardened into 5 different size pellets as hard as rock. 1971, in modern times, Pope Paul VI gave permission for scientific examination of both relics, the host and the blood pellets. And what was established is that when we look at the host, we have human heart muscle, cardiac muscle. It's the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And it is blood type AB. Likewise, with the blood hardened into rock, doesn't matter, it is human blood type AB. Now remember that, type AB, because we're going to hear that again and again. So what's going on here? This is not a medieval invention. Whatever way we look at it, this is a modern scientific established fact that what we have in front of us is something human. Human heart muscle, human blood, blood type AB. What's the natural explanation for it? We have none. Now the next miracle. This is the famous miracle of Bolsena Orvieto. And it's a similar story. We have a priest, Peter of Prague. Now this is the mid 13th century. It's the year 1263. We have this priest traveling on pilgrimage to Rome. On the way to Rome, he stops over in a church, a small church, the Church of St. Christina, to say Mass. This same priest, similar to that monk from 4.5 centuries earlier, was plagued with doubts about the church's teaching on transubstantiation. And while he's saying Mass in this small church and he elevates the host, blood flows from the host down his fingers and drips onto the floor. That picture in the bottom right corner is a picture of the blood stains on the tiles, on the floor of the Church of St. Christina today, as it appears today. And of course, nearby at the time, the Pope Urban IV, was staying at the town of Orvieto. And so this was an opportunity for this repentant priest. I mean, he went to see the Pope to show him the evidence of the miracle, because the blood also fell upon the corporal. And so they took that corporal with the blood stains to show the Pope. This priest confessed his sin of doubt. And the Pope was convinced by what he saw. And within a year, he'd commissioned the greatest saints of his time, St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Bonaventure, to author a new Mass to celebrate this great miracle. And it was the liturgy as created by St. Thomas Aquinas, who was accepted by the Pope, and that became the liturgy and the feast in the Universal Church, Corpus Christi. So the Feast of Corpus Christi in the Church was instituted in response to this miracle. Now today, the relic remains there, the bloodstains remain there in the Church of St. Christina. The actual corporal remains as a relic, and it's housed in the basilica there at Orvieto. I visited that place a couple of times. You can see it there. If you go up near the sanctuary, it's housed in a reliquary. And if you look at it closely, the bloodstains, you can just make them out. from that little distance. You can't go right up to it and have a look at it face to face, but you can just tell the stains that's still there on the corporal. And the artwork in that basilica is outstanding, which tells the whole story of the miracle, the Pope, St. Thomas Aquinas, etc., etc. So it's worth visiting in its own right. Okay. Now go to the next miracle of Siena. This is one miracle I have seen myself. I'll tell you the story in a moment. But the facts pertaining to this miracle, we go back to the just before the Feast of the Assumption of Our Lady. It's the day before, it's the 14th of August, 1730. And so people will focus on the vigil of that great Marian feast. On the 14th of August, however, thieves broke into the church of St. Francis, and they stole the ciborium containing 348 complete hosts and 6 half hosts. Now, this was a sacrilege, and the people perceived it to be that. The culture and society was different in those days. This was seen as a heinous crime, a calamity which stopped the whole town. And the festivities in honour of Our Lady's Assumption were brought to an end. And people were led by the clergy, were doing public acts of reparation, public acts of prayer for the recovery of these stolen hosts. Well, eventually, a couple of days later, in another church, it was a church of St. Mary of Provenzano, the hosts were found. They were dumped in a poor box. They had dust on them. They had cobwebs on them. But they were brought back to the original church. So people were relieved. Prayers were answered. And people, as part of their prayer and reparation and thanksgiving, would go to the church, say their prayers, process in and out, etc. And so the hosts were not consumed straight away. And they weren't going to be consumed straight away because of the dust and the cobwebs, etc. But what had happened after time, what should have happened over time is that these hosts should have acted like any other unconsecrated bread. What happens to bread over time? Goes hard, goes stale, cracks, decomposes. The host should have become warped, changed colour, eventually over decades, collapse into powder, etc. Not these hosts. They just remained as they are, as they were. Large, white, pristine, fresh. And in this container, which wasn't airtight, they remained fresh. And over the years, over the decades, and over the centuries, scientific tests have been done on these hosts. Like some basic tests, they'd stick other hosts in the same container. Unconsecrated hosts. Under the same conditions. After 10 years, they'll be warped. Turn yellow. After 60 years, those same hosts would have just decayed into powder. These hosts, no, not at all. They remain exactly as they were originally. Over time, some of these hosts have been consumed. So the original 348 plus 6 halves were down to just over 200, about 230 are left today. Scientific tests were done on these hosts on 4 occasions: 1780, 1789, 1914, 1922. Now, I'm taking this quote from a Professor Ciro Grimaldi. Now, I took this quote from the book Eucharistic Miracles by Joan Carroll Cruz. And she quotes him as saying, after the 1914 examination of these hosts, the holy particles of unleavened bread represent an example of perfect preservation, a singular phenomenon that inverts the natural law of the conservation of organic material. It is a fact unique in the annals of science. Now, every month to this day, they expose these hosts publicly for public adoration on the 17th of every month. So we're talking now about 286 years 286 years. Imagine a loaf of bread remaining fresh for 286 years. And you can eat it as if it was just baked in the morning. I've seen these hosts. I went on the Nemtala Hardini Beatification tour in 1998, in May 98. And we visited Siena. And I was a little bit bored. We had a guide, Italian fellow. He was okay. But in my own ego, I thought, like, I know more than this fella, and I'm bored. So when we got to Siena, I didn't follow the tour group. I decided to do my own thing. I had a map. I saw the main churches on the map, and I remember, because I taught this as a lesson every year at St. Charles, in my course, Eucharistic Miracles. I remembered that this miracle was in the Church of St. Francis. So I looked at the map. We were there at the Church of St. Dominic. I'll make my way to the Church of St. Francis. I got there, magnificent church inside. Now, where's this miracle? This has to be somewhere prominent. So I'm looking, walking around. I walk right around the whole church, around the edge of I can't find anything. What's going on? Well, it's 1 o'clock, so siesta time has begun in Italy. And I'm getting a little bit exasperated, like, okay, I'm here, where is it? I'm never going to come back. I want to see it. Well, I have been back twice, but at that time I didn't know I was ever going to go back. So I saw this man sweeping the floor. He's just dressed in ordinary clothes. And I asked him, look, excuse me, sir, I'm from Australia. Now, from what I know, that this church has a Eucharistic miracle, and it should be here somewhere in the church for me to see. Do you know about it? Do you know where it is? And he said, where are you from? I said, I'm from Sydney, Australia. I've come all the way. I really want to see this miracle. And he said, well, I'm a priest. He was just sweeping the floor during the siesta time. And I used to serve in Australia. I used to be in Sydney. Just because of that, I'm going to do you a favour. So I'm going to show you the miracle. By then, a few of the pilgrimage group had arrived. So there was 3 or 4 of us now. This is just coincidence. And then as he's taking us up to the front of the church, then we turn to the right, we turn to the right again, and there's this beautiful side chapel. I'd been in there, I was there, but I couldn't find or see anything. It was because there was this beautiful pink marble wall that was just there with no markings on it. And this priest pulled out a key and he unlocked it and he rolled it to the right. And there it was, the container with these hosts. And he warned us twice, you're coming to a door, not to be just a tourist. You're coming to a door. And I'm saying, yes, I'm coming to a door. And we all knelt on the railing and he brought out the container with the host and he brought it out and he showed it to us face to face like this. It was this close to my face. And I could see all the hosts, and they're like about this bit bigger than 50-cent coins. And they are magnificent white hosts, as if it was just created that morning. Then, that was 1998. They are 268 years old at that time. You can add another 18 years now to that. All right, then we've got the next miracle of Betania. This is very modern, 8th of December 1991, and the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. Father Otti Ossa Aristazabal was celebrating midnight mass when immediately after breaking the consecrated host into 4 pieces, a red substance oozed out of the host. Father Otti placed the bleeding host in a chalice and put it in the tabernacle. When Father Otti looked at the host the next morning, it was still bleeding. So he placed it in a monstrance and showed it to the people attending Mass. And the people were very excited. People began getting out their cameras, taking photographs, getting their video recorders, filming it all. blood. What do you do next? Tell the local bishop. The bishop was Bishop Ricardo of Los Tecos. He ordered that the host be taken, this is Venezuela, be taken to the city of Caracas, the capital, for examination. The examination determined that the red substance was human blood, and it was type AB. There you go, AB blood. Today, the miraculous host is housed in the convent of the Augustinian Sisters in Los Tecos, where it is still to this day adored by visiting pilgrims. Now, a similar miracle, this time in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, even more modern times, 1996, 18th of August 1996, a priest in Buenos Aires was given a host that had been found in a candle holder. Someone who probably received the host on their hand didn't bother consuming the host, dumped it somewhere and had some sense of respect or whatever and decided to leave it on a candle holder. Someone found it. It was covered in dirt, so what's the standard practice? You put the host in a bowl of water and let the host dissolve naturally. 8 days later, now 26th of August, the priest opened the tabernacle just to see what's happened with the host. It should have dissolved by then, but no, the host had turned red and was oozing a blood-like substance. Now, the priest then informed his bishop, and the bishop at that time, the auxiliary bishop of Buenos Aires, was a George Bergoglio, who's now Pope Francis, okay? And Father George, let's call him that at the moment, now Pope Francis, well, he has a great devotion to the Eucharist, so he's seen something here, he's something unusual. He's tending to believe something's happening, so he organises a professional examination. So firstly, he gets a photographer in to take photos of the host on the 26th of August and then again on the 6th of September. Then this Bishop George becomes, very soon, Archbishop of Buenos Aires, and as Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he's going to launch a more detailed examination of this host. So he asks a Bolivian atheist professor, Dr. Ricardo Castanon, to conduct an investigation. Dr. Castanon took a small piece of the host and some of the liquid, the blood substance, or the red substance, sealed it and sent it to the United States for examination. Now we move forward to April 2004, and this Dr. Frederick Zugerby in New York receives this material for examination. He doesn't know what it is, he hasn't been told where it's come from. He's just been asked to determine what are the substances. What is this piece of bread, or what is this matter? What is this liquid? Tell us what it is. Well, after examining it, he's a heart specialist, by the way, and a forensic pathologist. He determined that it was human heart muscle of a male, blood type AB, and from the left ventricle of the heart. Moreover, the heart was inflamed as if it had been recently injured. Even more remarkably, there existed white blood cells, which could only exist if the sample had been taken from a living person. Dr. Zugerby stated how or why a communion host could change its character and become living human flesh, and blood is outside the ability of science to answer. Well, thank you very much. Exactly right. All science can tell us is what it is. It can't tell us how it became that. Our faith supplies the rest. Tells us that's the miracle of transubstantiation. The bread and wine become, in substance, the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ. It is Christ as priest and victim. offering himself for us to the Father, even at this moment in heaven. Christ in heaven at this moment is Christ, the one mediator of the new and eternal covenant. And in heaven, he's interceding for us at the right hand of the Father, but not just simply prayerful intercession, it's priestly intercession. So what he's offering to the Father on our behalf is what he offered on Mount Calvary. The same sacrifice, but in a different manner, different mode. And so what Jesus is and what he's doing, who he is and what he's doing in heaven is the same as who he was and what he did on Mount Calvary, and that's the Christ we're receiving. Christ the priest, Christ the Lamb of God. Okay, now we've got the next category of miracles relating to the Marian Shrine of Lourdes. Now, we've all heard of Lourdes. Who's been to Lourdes? Okay, you want to go after tonight, I'm sure. I've been there once, went there on my honeymoon. A little miracle happened to me. My marriage survived, that's the miracle. No, that wasn't the miracle. There was no one there. We were there, my wife and I were there in mid-January. Beautiful, freezing cold, no one's there, don't have to line up for anything. So what one traditional activity people do among others is that you actually can go into the waters. There are little baths, you wait in line normally, you go in, say only with my shorts, stand in freezing cold water, and then they carry you backwards, they dip you into the water and take you out again. Now they tell you what happens often is that when you come out of the water, you're perfectly dry, immediately coming out of a bath of water. And that's exactly what happened to me. I was perfectly dry. So I received that miracle. My wife went down and came out totally wet. She got no miracle. So read into that what you want. We won't go there. All right? Okay. But anyway, there's been over 2,500 claimed miracles relating to the Shrine of Our Lady of Lourdes. There are formally, as of 2014, when I first prepared this presentation, there were 69 approved, canonical, fully approved miracles of Lourdes. There have been thousands more that haven't gone through the rigorous examination and process to be canonized as a miracle. The two miracles I've got here on the screen are actually two unofficial, uncanonical, or non-canonical miracles. There's some others I'll show you, but the first two are quite amazing. The first one is Gabriel Gargam. Now that's a picture of him on the left. This was a young man who was dying. He had a train accident, severely injured in the train accident. And had total paralysis. He was an atheist, he didn't believe in God, and he was wasting away. He could only be fed, through a tube, and he'd been reduced to a bare skeleton, and he was dying in his early 20s. His mother and his auntie were both very religious. His auntie was a nun, and they insisted that he go to Lourdes. But he didn't go to Lourdes out of faith. He just went to Lourdes because he was just to please his mother and auntie. So there were two miracles when he got to Lourdes. The first one was a spiritual miracle. He gained faith, he went to confession, and he received the Blessed Sacrament. That same day, while he was still a cripple, the priest came by doing the traditional blessing of the sick, holding a monstrance with the Blessed Sacrament. And as soon as the priest blessed him where he was, he felt this sudden strength in his body. Now this is a man who was paralyzed completely and reduced to a skeleton, flesh and bones. And he started to call out, "I can walk, I can walk." So suddenly, He said, help me, I can walk. I feel I can walk. And suddenly he began to walk. Nearby, what's interesting at Lourdes is that there is this centre, medical scientific centre, set up for the sole purpose of examining claimed miracles. And Gargam went straight there. And he was examined by 60 doctors, 60 professionals. And they all pronounced him totally cured of everything. He spent the rest of his life, Gabriel Gargam spent the rest of his life at Lourdes tending to the other sick pilgrims who'd come, as you can see in that picture, helping them off trains and vehicles, carrying them on stretchers, etc. Now that's one of the non-approved miracles, yet to be canonized. The same with Jack Trainer. Now Jack Trainer was a British soldier, Catholic from Liverpool in England. World War I, fighting in the trenches, bomb explodes near him, rips a hole in his head, causes brain damage. So this is what he was suffering from as a consequence. Now that happens, I think, in 1915 when he gets these injuries. He suffered now from epilepsy, paralysis of the radial, median and ulnar nerves of the right arm. So epilepsy, paralyzed right arm, atrophy of the shoulder and pectoral muscles. They were decaying because they couldn't be active. A 2.5 centimetre traphyline opening in the right parietal region of the skull, put it simply, a 2.5 centimetre hole in the head. Absence of voluntary movement in the legs, he couldn't walk. A loss of feeling, lack of bodily control. He goes to Lourdes 8 years later. It's 1923, 25th of July. He goes, he's pushed to go. His wife is pushing him to go. So he arrives at Lourdes, and I think it's the 4th day he's there. And it's the same event. Blessing of the sick by a priest carrying the Blessed Sacrament in a monstrance, and immediate cure. All his paralysis disappears. He's got movement in his arms. He can walk. He can carry heavy things. His wife sends him a telegram asking, how are you doing? He writes back and he says, I'm feeling better, but he doesn't say anything more. He's fully cured. He sends a message to other friends back in London that he's totally cured. He doesn't tell his wife. So there are thousands of people who know the full story, but not his wife. When Jack Trainer arrives back in London, he's coming home by train, there are thousands of people there. The wife's wondering what's going on. She wants to get to the front to meet her husband when he comes off the train. They wouldn't let her through. She has to convince the crowd control that she's Jack's wife. So they let her up the front. Jack comes off the train, and that's where you see him. By the way, that's Jack before he leaves to Lourdes. Paralyzed, in a wheelchair, couldn't walk. That's Jack here in the bottom right-hand corner, coming off the train, pushing the same wheelchair with his bag in the wheelchair, totally cured. That's what his wife sees. Her husband coming off the train, totally cured. The Anglican Bishop of Liverpool, hearing about this miracle, converts to the Catholic Church. Jack gets a job in coal mines carrying 200-pound sacks on his shoulders. Total cure. And again, that's one of the unofficial miracles of Lourdes. We move on, some other ones. There are so many to choose from. They're all spectacular. They're all profound in their own way. I've chose these three because of how contemporary they are. 20th century miracles, very modern, fully tested by scientists and doctors. No natural explanation. I'll just read them out. Anna Santinello was cured in 1952. that's her on the left, a fatal form of rheumatic heart disease known as Bollard's disease. Her condition had deteriorated to the point where she was bedridden and could barely move, barely breathe. The same illness had killed one of her brothers and a sister. Upon being lowered by stretcher into the icy cold Lourdes waters, Santinello felt a hot explosion in her chest. Minutes later, she was able to get out of her stretcher and walk. A heart specialist back in Italy pronounced her perfectly healthy. In 1964, the church declared her case an extraordinary healing, and in 2005, it was declared to be miraculous and one of the 69 miracles. Serge Francois was cured, that's the gentleman in the top right corner, on the 13th of April 2002. He had paralysis of his left leg. He had 2 operations which couldn't cure him, a herniated disc, etc. He couldn't walk. He goes to Lourdes, he prays at the Lourdes grotto, he went to the spring to drink the Lourdes water and wash his face. Upon doing that, he had a sudden surge of power within him. He felt totally cured, and he was. The medical experts who examined him straight away declared the following: that his recovery was sudden, complete, unrelated to any particular therapy, and durable. In thanksgiving for this miracle, remember, this is a man who couldn't walk. In thanksgiving for this cure, he decided to do a pilgrimage to Compostela and he took the long route. You can do a 100-kilometer walk. You could do a 297-kilometer walk from Lyon. You could do the 900-kilometer walk from the edge of the Pyrenees. You could do one from central France in Vézelay, and you could do one from the Pillar of St. James in Paris. I'm not sure which one of the latter two he did, but he did the 1,560-kilometer walk to Compostela, a man who couldn't previously walk before going to Lourdes. And the last one, Daniela Castelli, she was suffering numerous cancers, tumours in her body. She was cured in May 1989. She had a tumour in the rectal, bladder and genital regions. In an effort to save her life, Daniela underwent a hysterectomy, an annexectomy, and a partial pancreatectomy. Okay? So numerous operations, and she was not getting better. Her doctor husband wanted to take her to America for more specialist treatment, but she said no. She said, I'll go to Lourdes instead. She goes into the baths. Afterwards, she just felt well. She just felt good. So she presented herself to that medical office on site there. All agreed that she had been cured in a complete and lasting way, unrelated to any treatment or surgeries. The Lourdes test to determine whether an event is miraculous or not is very strict, very stringent. It requires, you have to prove that your cure was virtually instantaneous. It was total. There were no agents involved, no treatment. It's not one of those like Benny Hinn miracles where, in the moment of hype and enthusiasm, someone lays hands on you and you fall over backwards, or you can get up and walk for a little bit. It has to be total and permanent cure. Very strict test. Next series of miracles, what we call incorrupt bodies. We've got hundreds of them. It's a book you can buy. The same author that I mentioned earlier, Joan Carroll Cruz, has brought out a book, I think in the late 70s or early 80s, The Incorruptibles. You'll find all these saints plus many more in that book. The first incorrupt body we have, in the top left corner, is Saint Cecilia, Roman martyr from the year 177. She was one of those converts to Christ who dedicated her whole life to Jesus. that she became a spouse of Jesus. She made a personal commitment that he is my husband and I'm not going to marry anyone else. But her parents, who were not Christian, insisted that she would marry, and they'd lined up a nice Roman boy for that purpose, a non-Christian, and she refused to marry him. And when it became known that she wasn't, the reason why was because she was Christian. Well, at that time, Christianity was a prescribed religion, and if you came before magistrates or governors on the charge of being a Christian and you refused to recant, then the sentence would be a death sentence. And that's what the execution was pronounced upon her. So the interesting thing is that the executioner was very taken by St. Cecilia, very sympathetic, and was quite reluctant to just brutally execute her. So he was half-hearted in doing it. So when he applied the axe to her head, he only went halfway. So she died. She wasn't totally beheaded. She would have died probably a little slowly from loss of blood because of the incision in the neck. When her body is uncovered in excavations of the catacombs in the year 1599, she's found in that position. Now, when you go to the catacomb of St. Callistus today, her body's no longer there because it's been taken to the church of St. Travesteri. It's actually the church of St. Cecilia in Trastevere. But that's how they found her body, with the wound still in her neck, incorrupt, and giving off a beautiful odor, a perfume. And her fingers were in a particular position. And some surmise that she was giving testimony to her belief in Christ and the Trinity through the positioning of her fingers. And it's still incorrupt to this very day. Now, the next one, a very famous saint for Maronites, is this Saint Rita of Cassia. She's not Maronite, but I guess that a lot of women have devotion to her because, knowing her story, she had a very hard time with her husband. And her husband and her sons were all murdered. Very sad. Married, then she joined afterwards, she joined the Augustinian nuns. Very holy, very pious life. I've been to Cassia. I've been to the church where her body is in the sarcophagus, the glass sarcophagus. Not a great church, beautiful surrounds. The artwork in the churches could be much improved, but the body is in the casket still. And you can go there and you can see it. And people have testified that the body is still virtually intact. She died in 1457. There is discoloration. Now, with incorrupt bodies, what's the theology here? There are different degrees of preservation. Some of them, when you look at their bodies, it's as if they only died that morning. Others would be discolored, limited deterioration, dried up. But what's not happening? See, the bodies can still be impacted externally by external forces. What doesn't happen is this total corruption that sets in from within, the decomposition from within. That's not what's happening. So what we have here with incorrupt bodies, why are we having incorrupt bodies? It's God giving evidence to us of the sanctity of that particular person, so that that person can be known and admired and imitated to some degree by the faithful. Some people testify that they've seen St. Rita's body actually move from one side to the other, move within the sarcophagus, that her eyes open and close. And like St. Cecilia, can smell a sweet perfume emanating from the coffin from time to time. Then we've got probably the two most spectacular incorrupt bodies, St. Bernadette of Lourdes, in the bottom left, and St. Catherine Labouré in the bottom centre. Both of them, of course, received apparitions of Our Lady. St. Bernadette, the Lourdes apparitions, St. Catherine Labouré, the apparitions of Our Lady of the Miraculous Medal. So we're talking about the 1850s, 1858, 1870, that period. What I can say, you can go visit these bodies today. What I can say about St. Bernadette of Lourdes is that her body is very much still intact and very supple. In fact, the nuns have to change the habit regularly. They have to put new clothes on her because her body still sweats and soils the habit. Now, I was told this a couple of decades ago, and so what I'm telling you is what I've heard informally, but I tend to believe this. There was a decision once by the religious order to put her in another habit, not in the original habit that she was dressed in and died in as a nun in the 19th century. And so they wanted to put her in one of the more modern, up-to-date habits. And when they tried to do that, they tried to separate the hands. As you can see, the hands are together. The hands wouldn't separate. The body would refuse to accept that and wanted to stay, and telling us she's to stay in the original habit she lived and died in. And that's the case today. With St. Catherine Labouré, she had the great privilege. She actually, for 2 hours, was kneeling in the lap of Our Lady during the course of these apparitions. Her body, well, see, with St. Bernadette, there is like a thin wax mask on the face. With St. Catherine Labouré, she's even more perfectly preserved. You see her eyes glistening and colourful as if she was still alive at this moment. It says here that, yes, she died in 1876. Her body was exhumed in 1932. So it's 56 years later. Found to be totally incorrupt. Her legs and her arms were completely supple, flexible. No rigor mortis whatsoever. Even her eyes were still shining blue. And you can go to Rue de Bac today in Paris and see her as if she had just died that morning. Padre Pio there in the bottom right died in 1968, and I think in 2004 they opened the coffin, or 40 years later, so 2008, they opened the coffin. And this is what Archbishop Domenico D'Ambrosio said at looking at his body. The top part of the skull is partly skeletal, but the chin is perfect and the rest of the body is well preserved. The knees, hands, mittens, and nails are perfectly visible. The hands look like they had just undergone a manicure. The robes were also found still intact and his feet visible. There was some degree of deterioration, so Padre Pio's face has been reconstructed with a lifelike silicone mask. So that it's mostly preserved. There is some decay, but ordinarily should have been totally decayed. The last one is St. Charbel, of course, relevant to us as Maronites. St. Charbel dies Christmas Eve, 1898, and no one went to his funeral except a couple of monks, buried him, because at the same time the Maronite patriarch had died and was buried. So anyone who was anyone in the church went to the funeral of the Maronite patriarch. A couple of monks bury St. Charbel. No big deal. A few months later, people noticed a light shining upon the spot where St. Charbel was buried. 4 months after he died, they opened the grave. They opened the coffin. And St. Charbel's body is found incorrupt, floating in liquid. It should have been totally decayed because they'd put lime into the coffin to decay the body. No decay. The water coming in should have rotted the body. No rotting of the body. For the next 67 years, from 1898 to 1965, his body remained perfectly intact. Like St. Bernadette of Lourdes, they had to change his habit regularly because it would soil. Twice a week they changed his habit because of a mysterious secretion coming from his body. Perspiration and blood from the pores of his body. Now this remained the case until the day of his beatification, which was at the end of the Second Vatican Council in December, I think to be precise, December 7th, 1965. Strangely, immediately after his beatification, his body decayed. All that remains today are his bones, which are reddish in colour, but they still secrete, miraculously, some type of oil, which shouldn't be the case. Why that happened is a mystery. I have my theory. I won't put it out there publicly. But it's very interesting why that happened. It's never happened before like that. When a saint is beatified or canonized, an incorrupt saint, that body somehow then decays, as it did with St. Charbel very quickly. Next category of miracles, stigmata. They always get people excited. Young kids, when I used to teach at St. Charbel's, young kids were fascinated by stigmatas. That's because we had a movie came out in the 90s called Stigmata, and so tell us about stigmata. What's stigmatas about? Well, stigmatas, basically they're the wounds of Christ, and they appear in very select souls, in the bodies of very select souls. The first ever recorded stigmata were the wounds in the hands and feet and side of St. Francis of Assisi. The next recorded stigmata is with St. Catherine of Siena. Now, these are two colossal saints. We've had a number of verified stigmata since those times. That's the 13th and 14th centuries. Not all stigmata are the same. What's the purpose of it? What's the theology behind it? It's to perfect those saints, to give them a more complete, if not total participation in Christ's own sufferings, so they could suffer more like him and offer up that suffering for whatever holy intentions. Purifies their love. It's easy to love when things are going well, like Job. Why was Job tested? To perfect his love. If he's going to love God while he's under trial, persecution, losing everything, this was the test that the devil offered God. He only loves you because he's got everything. I bet if you allowed me to take away everything, he'll curse your holy name. So to perfect Job's love, take everything away from him, cause him to suffer, and if he continues to love God like he did when times were good, then his love is perfected. And this is the purpose of suffering for any soul. Ordinary souls, holy souls, is to perfect their love. So you can see the theology behind stigmata is one, to perfect their love, to give them a greater participation in Christ's own sufferings, to offer up that suffering for whatever intentions that are worthy. Now, I'll read to you some of the details of these stigmatists here. Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, on the left, from 1802 until her death, bore the wounds of the crown of thorns. So just imagine that crown of thorns. And after 1812, so 10 years later, a full stigmata of Christ, so in the hands, feet, and side, including a cross over her heart. These wounds were judged as authentic by a diocesan commission of doctors and clergy. At the end of 1818, so 16 years into this phenomenon, Anne Catherine Emmerich was partially granted her prayer to be relieved of the stigmata, with the wounds in her hands and feet closing. However, on each Good Friday, all these wounds reopened again, every Good Friday, for the rest of her life. In the top centre is Sister Saint Gemma Galgani. She first received the stigmata of the 5 wounds of Christ on the 8th of June, 1899, the vigil of the Feast of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So full stigmata, 1899. They were witnessed and carefully examined by her spiritual director. The wounds would appear every week at 8 p.m. on Thursday night and continue until 3 p.m. the next day, Friday. Intense pain and blood flow would accompany each appearance of the stigmata. This phenomenon lasted until early 1900. So it went for about 8 months, when it stopped at the command of St. Gemma's spiritual director. What's the test here by the spiritual director? It's to test the authenticity of this phenomenon. Obedience is critical. Was this something that she concocted herself, psychosomatic, attention-seeking, out of excessive self-love to gain attention? Was it the devil manifesting this phenomenon on her body somehow? To test its authenticity, we command her to pray, to ask for this to stop. And it stopped. It was to prove her humility. And it's a sign of the authenticity of this phenomenon. Therese Newman here on the right, modern times, stigmata plus other miraculous events. This woman, German, lived on the Eucharist alone every day from 1926 to 1962 until her death. So 36 years she survived only on the Eucharist. A modern German woman. She would testify that at the end of each day she felt she was dying, she's going. When she received the Eucharist, she was revitalized until her death. Now, not officially declared a blessed or a saint yet. She had 2 miracles happen in her life, both on the feast day of St. Therese of the Infant Jesus. 1923, on the feast day of St. Therese, she was cured of her blindness. Exactly 2 years later, on the same feast day, she was cured of her paralysis. She had visions, and the stigmata was of this nature. She bled on Fridays and during the final 2 weeks of Lent. Every Friday she bled, and during the final 2 weeks of Lent each year. So this woman had a host of phenomena around her. And again, last here, Padre Pio again. The stigmata of Padre Pio was interesting. He first received visible signs of stigmata on the 17th of September 1915. On the 5th of August 1918, his side was mystically pierced. On the 20th of September, with further piercings of his hands and feet. Now, after the piercings of the 20th of September, his stigmata was complete. Christ appeared to him and said to him, "You will carry these wounds for 50 years, for 50 years." 50 years, and 1 day later he died. And the wounds in his hands, in his feet, healed after he died, disappeared, after he died. Now we've got a miscellaneous category of miracles. These are 2 martyrs, Roman martyrs, St. Januarius and St. Pantaleon, who both were martyred, put to death in the year 305, in the first couple of years of the Diocletian persecution. Now, St. Januarius was a bishop. 3 times a year, lasting in total 18 days, 3 times a year, beginning the first Sunday in May, the 19th of September, and the 16th of December. So the same dates every year and for the same period of time, lasting 18 days, the relic of St. Januarius' blood contained as powder and solid elements in the silver and glass vial, as you can see in the picture, in Naples Cathedral, liquefies without any scientific explanation. So this is the blood relic of St. Januarius. It's in the form of some solids and powder. And every year, 3 times a year, starting on the same days every year and going for the same length of time each year, that relic turns into liquid blood. Something similar with the other saint, Saint Pantaleon, again a martyr. Now his relic, relic of his blood is contained in the Monastery of the Incarnation in Madrid, in Spain. It's kept in a glass capsule. Now this blood is solid, hardened. It remains so the entire year, except every year on the same day, July 27, this vial containing the hardened blood liquefies in front of all and stays liquefied for 24 hours. So every 27th of July, hordes of people come to this monastery, are waiting in the church. The relic is held up, and it's held up as solid, and it transforms. You see it become liquid. Actually, once I witnessed this on Channel 9 News, they showed it for some reason. I don't know why Channel 9 slipped up here and promoted something, said something positive about religion. But not that you believe anything or everything you see on TV, but I'm there watching the news, and they have a short 30-second clip of everyone going to this church, and the bishop is holding it up, and it goes liquid. They say if it doesn't turn liquid in a particular year, it portends a great disaster. It did not go liquid on the 27th of July, 1914. And the First World War broke out. There are some other instances of it as well, but that's a fact. It did not go liquid that year. Then we've got the image of Our Lady of Las Lajas. Every time I show this, I get people, go look on your iPhone, have a look at this image. This is in a cave in Colombia, in a cave above the Guaitara River. This image was discovered by native Indians in the 18th century. A native Indian just happened to walk into this cave and see this image of Our Lady carrying the Christ child with 2 saints. They look the same. One's dressed as a Dominican, one's dressed as a Franciscan. Look it up. Our Lady of the Rock, Las Lajas. What's so miraculous about this image? Well, we don't know how it got on the rock. We don't know who painted it. But it's not on the rock. It's in the rock. The image is 4 feet deep into the rock. So imagine someone got a buzzsaw or whatever and they sliced it salami style. This rock, take a foot off, then a second foot, and a third foot. The image is still there. It's penetrated into the rock. Over 50 scientists from 12 different countries have examined this image and give no explanation as to how or why it's there. Next one, the miracle of the Son of Our Lady of Fatima. This is the most spectacular miracle known in history, witnessed by the most number of people in history, 70,000. The only miracle that was foretold 3 months in advance. You know the basic story. Our Lady was appearing from May 13 and again on June 13, July 13, meant to be August 13, but that ended up being the 15th because the children were kidnapped. September 13 and again on October 13. The message is very deep and profound. It's a public prophecy telling us what are the reasons for this terrible world war, how we can get peace through prayer and penance, particularly praying the rosary, how Russia would rise up as a great evil power and spread her errors throughout the world, how Russia essentially will be an instrument of chastisement upon a sinful West, and giving other secrets relating to the vision of hell. The third secret, there's still a lot of controversy about the third secret. There's still controversy about whether the Immaculate Heart has really triumphed yet. Pope Benedict said in 2010 he's still waiting for the triumph of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. There's still claims that the whole third secret has not yet been fully revealed. Anyway, what's important for our purposes here is that to prove to the crowd or the public authorities that Our Lady was really appearing and that the message was authentic, true, and necessary to be known and lived out, that she'll do a public miracle for all to believe. So in that crowd of 70,000, there were hundreds of skeptics, government officials, secularists, socialists, atheists, Freemasons, members of the media, to come and see the great downfall of these children and to expose and mock the fraud. When the miracle occurred, the miracle of the sun, it was pouring rain. I don't know if the photos show that, but 70,000 people drenched in rain, all carrying raincoats or umbrellas. The mud was ankle deep. At the same time, the terrible battle of Passchendaele in Belgium was happening. The soldiers were suffering in the same conditions. A war that had gone out of control, 13 million dead, no hope of escaping or end, and no hope of this war coming to an end soon. Midday, the sun pierces through the clouds and then begins to spin like a Catherine wheel, and colours, all different colours, are spinning from the sun. And people are looking at it at first in amazement, but then the sun begins to zigzag, dance in the sky. And then the sun appears to come collapsing towards the earth, falling to the earth. And people are becoming hysterical and screaming and beginning and shouting and thinking this is the end of the world. And then the sun stops and goes back into its original position. This was seen for up to 40 kilometres away, 25 miles away. Hundreds of conversions on the spot, hundreds of miracles on the spot, cures, cripples, blind people. One of the secular atheistic journalists who was there wrote that story there in the front page of our secular newspaper the next day and received death threats as a consequence. But he saw what he saw. The ground was dry. Everyone was dry immediately after the sun went back into position. A nice touch, motherly touch from Our Lady as more evidence of what had just happened. The next miracle of Hiroshima. Just 2 miracles to go and we're finished. This relates to Our Lady of Fatima as well. 6th of August, 1945, the United States decides that we have to end the war. The Battle of Okinawa from May to June was terrible. 20,000 Allied dead, 108,000 Japanese dead. It was the first Japanese island the Americans captured. They realized if we were to invade Japan, full-on invasion, there'd be 10 million Japanese dead, 2 or 3 million American casualties. So they decided we have to end this war quickly. And Russia was going to come into the war 3 days later, and they wanted to knock Japan out of the war before Russia came in and moved on eastern territories. I'm not saying they're morally justified to do this. Attacking Hiroshima and Nagasaki with atomic bombs was an immoral act. I'm just telling you what their rationale was. The bomb, Hiroshima was chosen, Nagasaki was chosen. It was the second city. They actually wanted to attack another city that same day, but cloud visibility was very poor. Both of these cities were the most Catholic cities in Japan, by the way. This is where Nagasaki was where St. Maximilian Kolbe did his missionary work. The bomb was 20,000 tons of TNT. It fell just after 8 a.m. in the morning. The blast zone was 1 mile in radius, so it's 2 miles in diameter, was the zone of total destruction, total annihilation. Over 80,000 people died that day. If you can see the photo on the left, a very damaged church at the bottom. Near the top, 1/3 of the way from the top, is a house that was not destroyed. In that house were, I think, 8 Jesuit priests. When the bomb dropped, that house was the only one left standing. None of those Jesuits died. None of those Jesuits received radiation poisoning. All they felt was that like an earthquake, and they were bouncing up and down within the house. None of them were seriously injured. The priests afterwards said, you see a couple of the priests there on the screen.
I was in my room with another priest at 8:15 when suddenly we saw a blinding light, like a flash of magnesium. Naturally, we were surprised and jumped up to see what was happening. As I opened the door which faced the city, we heard a formidable explosion, similar to the blast of a hurricane. At the same time, doors, windows, and walls fell upon us in smithereens. We were thrown to the floor. I shall never forget my first sight of what was the result of the atomic bomb. A group of young women, 18 or 20 years old, clinging to one another as they dragged themselves along the road. One had a blister that almost covered her chest. She had burns across half of her face and a cut in her scalp caused probably by a falling tile, while great quantities of blood coursed freely down her face. On and on they came, a steady procession numbering some 150,000. This gives some idea of the scene of the horror that was Hiroshima. We did the only thing that could be done in the presence of such mass slaughter. We fell on our knees and prayed for guidance, as we were destitute of all human help.
Father Schiffer said that we survived because we were living the message of Fatima. We lived and prayed the rosary daily in that home. That's why they were not destroyed by the atom bomb, when everything and everyone else around them was annihilated. Next miracle, our last miracle for tonight. You would have heard of Nuhad el-Shami, another Lebanese Maronite miracle. This woman has hemiplegia on the left side, her left side totally paralyzed. Her leg, her arm, her mouth, she couldn't move. She had total obstruction of the brain left arteries, and 70% of the right ones were obstructed. On the night of Thursday, the 22nd of January, 1993, 22nd of January, 11 p.m., she's asleep in her room. Her husband's in the room next door. And a blinding light appears and 2 monks appear. Just to cut this long story short, one monk calls himself Father Shabul, goes to Nuhad and says, I'm going to make surgery on you. She's panicking, saying, well, how can you do surgery? The doctors didn't say I'm going to do surgery. So she just looks at the statue of Our Lady and says a prayer, and she feels the pain of the incisions in both sides of her neck. The other monk says nothing. The Father Shabul lifts her up and puts a pillow behind her back. The other monk gives her a glass of water. She grabs it with her arm and drinks the water. She realized this was her arm she couldn't move before. She realized she could move. The monks leave. She realizes she's well. She gets out of her bed. It's now 2 o'clock in the morning. She goes to her husband's room, turns on the light. Typical Lebanese husband, shouts and gets angry. Says, what are you doing? You're going to fall and do more damage to yourself. It'll be another catastrophe. She said, Father Charbel, St. Charbel appeared to me and did an operation on me. And now I'm cured. Later on, St. Rita of Cassia, the same St. Rita we saw earlier, incorrupt body, appeared to Nuhad and said that the other monk who was silent was St. Maroon. Every month, Nuhad, I believe she's still alive, I don't follow this closely, but every month on the 22nd, she goes to Anaya, where it's the shrine of St. Charbel. And her wounds open up and blood flows from the wound. Yes, that's right. This is what St. Charbel said to her. Do not leave the people. I cut you thanks to Providence so that people can see you. A lot of people have left the church. They neglect praying and respecting the saints. You can do nothing about the matter. I, Father Charbel, can come to the hermitage. I am always there. I do not leave the place. I want you to visit the hermitage every 22nd of the month and attend the Mass from now on. Thank you.